Hi, welcome to the channel. My name's Dylan. Is it just me, or is the gender war getting really contentious lately? When I started writing this, Senator Elizabeth Warren had just dropped out of the 2020 presidential race.
One of the hardest parts of this is all those baby promises and all those little girls who are going to have to wait 4 more years.
Yeah, this kind of took me a while, but there were extenuating circumstances. I understand her emotional response here. I voted Bernie, and Biden took my delegates, but I was on board with Elizabeth at the start of her campaign, and I remember what it was like when Hillary ran in 2008. I remember how frustrating it felt, and probably still feels, to be a girl in a democratic nation that has never elected a female head of state. And I definitely saw that same sentiment from Warren's diehard supporters. They weren't lamenting Bernie's established leftist coalition, or Warren's history as a Republican, or the DNA test. Apparently, the simple fact that she was an intelligent woman trying to play on the same field as elite men was what held her back. It's not at all unusual for this to be where the conversation has gone. We saw this 4 years ago and 12 years ago with Hillary, and even last year with Kamala Harris. What is unusual is I saw this same exact conversation play out 1 week earlier, outside of the government, in pop music videos. Within 1 day of each other, Rina Sawayama dropped the video for her song Comme des Garçons Like the Boys, and Taylor Swift dropped the video for her song The Man, both of which play with the fantasy of having the confidence of a successful man, and both of which have a bit of a drag component. These events coinciding like this feels to me like a pinch point, and we have a lot to unpack here. Just to be clear, we're talking about music videos today. The Elizabeth Warren thing was a distraction. Quick aside, I'm going to be talking about a lot of songs here, and I'm not going to play any of the audio because this is YouTube. I've put every music video I mention here into a playlist in no particular order that you can find in the description, but we're going to be spending most of our time talking about The Man, so if you haven't seen it, I recommend giving it a watch before we begin. Okay? Let's go. The most obvious difference between these two videos is Taylor is an extremely successful artist with a long history who is still trying to pivot towards woke and political discourse bait after a poorly received album. And Rina is an up-and-comer making a song about projecting confidence coming off a very well-received debut album about growing out of her insecurities. This is not uncharted territory for female pop stars. Beautiful young women get taken advantage of in the entertainment industry, and in pop especially, female artists can be restricted to a narrowly controlled and hyper-feminine image. The I Can Do Whatever a Man Does song is a staple of the edgy pop starlet's library, and gender bending is a pretty common approach to it. If I Were a Boy, Rich Girl, Do It Like a Dude, most of Kesha's first album.
About how chicks talk too much, and me and Leon were like, no, guys talk too much. So we had this war of who were more obnoxious.
Rina's song fits pretty nicely into this tradition and is just as much about mimicking the confidence of a man as it is about mimicking the confidence of someone who can afford designer clothes. The drag in the video is a natural extension of the song because it's a song about fashion and costume. I'm mostly just bringing it up because it's a bop and I like it, and it's super weird that this video debuted within a day of Taylor's. Hey guys, it's post-production Dylan. While I was editing this, Rina's album came out, and number one, it's fire, and number two, she did another drag video for Bad Friend, and it's very different in tone, and very, very cool and interesting. It's very special. It's like a little mini lighthouse, but I'm too far along in the process of this video to add a whole other paragraph about it, so just go watch it and form your own opinions. Alright, back to the video. You might notice, though, that none of those videos I compared it to actually feature the artist in boy drag. I'm generally a fan of boy drag as a video gimmick, but it's much rarer. And the examples that come to mind, You and I, Omo I Yeah, quite a few songs from Christine and the Queens, are all just straightforward songs about romance that lyrically have little to nothing to do with gender. The drag in the video is just a very queer expression of the fantasy of a sexy, smooth-talking, or alternatively stoic lover. And it is usually very sexual. The connection between masculinity and sexual freedom made in these videos says just as much about feminism as the outwardly feminist statement song from before. Both are valid approaches to draw attention to the performative and arbitrary nature of the gender binary, either for fun or for discourse, but they're different approaches. As a trans man, I have a pretty complicated relationship with this topic. When it comes to option A, I do remember what it was like being a girl and struggling for credibility. When I hadn't come out to myself, I often found myself wishing I had been born a boy so my life would be easier. Nowadays, I tend to find option B more empowering, because it turns out I literally did have a fantasy of becoming more outwardly masculine. I still love If I Were a Boy and that first Kesha album, but what makes them great is their bitterness and sarcasm. It has nothing to do with fantasy. It's not fair that men find success more easily than women, and that bitterness is a valid thing to make art about. But from the perspective of the listener, the viewer, it's inadvisable to stew in that bitterness. It can spiral into distrust and hate and get stuck there. Because I had framed men's social advantages as unfair shortcuts and head starts that I would never have as a woman, I was able to talk myself out of transitioning for years. I thought becoming male would be cowardly, selfish, cheating, or playing on easy mode like a casual. Seeing drag in videos showed me that gender wasn't just about social capital. It could also be personal liberation and a refusal to pander to the male gaze. That said, these approaches are not so incompatible that it is impossible to combine them, which I think the Sawayama video proves. So I think we're finally ready to talk about The Man. The Man is the fourth single from Lover, so we're still in the same album cycle as You Need to Calm Down, and it really shows. Following the critical disaster of an album that was Reputation, Taylor Swift seems to be trying to regain control of her image by standing for something bigger than herself and breaking her silence on the issues to reassure her largely female, largely LGBT fanbase that she's on their side and not the side of the neo-Nazis who worship her as an Aryan princess. It seems to have kind of worked. Steven Crowder is big mad about this video. But when I watched it, something seemed off. Let's start with the song itself. Like You Need to Calm Down, the production is sparse and simple to draw attention to the lyrics, but the melodies are not quite as memorable. It's a pretty cut-and-dry Me Too anthem. Despite her global success, Taylor Swift has still fallen victim to a lot of sexism and fights against towering male industry executives like Scooter Braun. It's a heartfelt bitterness that comes from experience. The experience of struggling to control your public image while watching your male cohorts be heaped with praise and getting away with much worse. It's not as universally relatable of a sentiment as the general woman-scorned energy of something like Mother's Daughter by Miley Cyrus, if only because not everyone would have the opportunity to be a fearless leader, alpha type, raking in dollars and getting bitches and models that Taylor would have. That said, the song itself is by no means a man-bashing song. The worst thing she says about being a man in the lyrics is that it wouldn't matter if she was rude or mad. It plays more like a longing for an opportunity she'll never be offered than an indictment of the male gender. The video, however, Taylor's first solo directing credit, takes a different tone. From start to finish, Taylor is dressed in men's suits, prosthetics, color contacts, packers, and a swaggering walk to create the character of the man. We've seen in the last batch of music videos co-directed by Swift that she has a knack for controversial images, but I'd say this is her most ambitious project yet. In it, she manspreads and smokes a cigar on the subway, pees on the subway wall, throws balls at her actual father after losing a sporting match, decorates her sets with women in bikinis, high-fives these hallway hands in a reference to Repulsion by Roman Polanski, recreates scenes from The Wolf of Wall Street using Martin Scorsese's actual director of photography, and ends on a reveal of the makeup transformation and a cheeky disclaimer of no men were harmed in the making of this video. Wow! Not to fall for the bait, but there's a lot to unpack here. What exactly is she going for? In her own words,
I wanted to show like a heightened version of how the world reacts to someone who's male, hot, rich, young, cocky. I wanted to show like how there's like immediate approval and benefit of the doubt given. And I wanted to show it in a really ridiculous, fantasized way.
Now, okay. So, I think the reason this doesn't feel like it works is a little more complicated than simply saying, yeah, rich, young, cis, white, self-assured, attractive men get a lot of approval in society, but Taylor is already all but one of those things. I think it's more complicated than that. For one, I don't think she lives up to her mission statement, because the video can't seem to decide if the extras should be heaping praise or rolling eyes. If immediate benefit of the doubt is what you're trying to show, I don't think I would have kept in all these disgusted reaction shots. I also think her feminism sometimes misses the mark here. Manspreading hasn't been a serious feminist talking point for like 5 years, and this scene with the young daughter feels pretty off base for how men actually handle being in public with their kids. It could be that the over-the-top video doesn't match the subdued production of the song, but y'all know the reason I'm obsessed with this video is the costume. The look and the walk together make for quite a convincing male impersonation that transfixed me and left me feeling confused and wanting to ask every trans person I know what they thought of it. I got a similar response across the board. It's cool, but it's not drag. I felt the same way, but couldn't get a reason why. Shout out to Proton Donor from my Discord for finding this Slate article interviewing drag king Pretty Ricky on the subject. Spoiler alert, he thinks it's not drag.
Lady Gaga performed as Joe Calderoni, so we've seen Joe as an actual persona. If Taylor Swift was to take what she did in this video and then perform as this character, that makes it more like drag kinging because now she's reusing this character. She's developing an alter ego that has a life of its own. I don't think that was the point of the video, that this character necessarily had a life of its own outside of the context of this music video. The video would have been different if it had started off with us seeing Taylor Swift get into this costume, and watching her go through the world dressed up as a man and how she's treated differently.
So it's not drag, but it would have been drag if we had seen her get into costume in the video, or if she continued to reuse the character for live performances. Those both seem reasonable, but don't solve the problem for me, because I can think of a very strong counterexample. Mamamoo is a 4-member K-pop girl group who debuted in 2015 with the single Oh Ah Yeah, a goofy love song about mistaking a handsome girl for a pretty guy. 3 of the 4 members wear drag in the video and play very classical drag archetypes, and 2 of them are even wearing facial prosthetics just like Taylor. This was their debut as a group, so they performed this song live maybe hundreds of times, and I was only able to find one performance where they incorporated the male costumes. In this performance, only Moonbyul and Hwasa perform in their drag personas. Huiyin, as far as I can find, never wore hers outside of the video. Does that mean that Moonbyul and Hwasa are in drag and Huiyin isn't? We see the costume change in the live performance, but not in the video, and I still think it's pretty clear that this is drag. But the Mamamoo girls aren't really going for the same thing Taylor's going for, are they?
It was drag if we were going to just define drag as someone dressing up as another gender, but I don't think what she did was being a drag king by any means. I think what she did was more acting than it was being in drag, and I think there are subtle differences between the two. Taylor Swift was impersonating a cis man, whereas drag kings are doing performative masculinity as more of a commentary on men, but not actually trying to be a man.
Now, this sounds very subjective to me. This definition of what drag is and is not seems to rely on both the audience perception and the artist's intention. Maybe that's a fair definition, and maybe it is fair to say that Taylor's intention was more male impersonation than drag. Maybe what you're doing can't be drag if your audience isn't interpreting it as drag. But to hear Taylor tell it, it does sound like she was trying to do a commentary on men. The issue Ricky seems to be taking is that she's trying to pass as cis while doing it, in a way that Gaga or Mamamoo weren't. This is where we get into the difference between male or female impersonation and drag, which is something I couldn't wrap my head around until I talked about this with my friend Korviday.
Recently I made an art project for my university course. I originally wanted to do something explicitly queer and explicitly transgender, but my teacher told me that I was too focused on gender theory and that my takes on trans issues were dogmatic. I was honestly pretty angry about this and decided to go in a completely different direction, naming my project The Binary Dogma. I didn't bring up trans people in my essay, instead focusing on 2 binary cisgender archetypes presented to us in advertising and media since the beginning of the 20th century, putting the gender binary under a microscope. The project was emotionally and aesthetically disconnected from queer culture. In the context of this essay, I guess the question is this drag? And my personal answer would be no. A word that could be used to describe it would be the French word transformisme. Although the word seems to be interconnected with drag historically, I feel like making that separation because the 2 words serve different artistic functions. I didn't feel comfortable using the word drag to describe this. My work here, although done by a queer person, is not about queer people. It isn't a celebration or an exaggeration of queerness or femininity or masculinity. Neither does it challenge those concepts in a meaningful way. It's a sterile attempt to depict the normative versions of them as they exist in mainstream media. Taylor Swift's character doesn't really feel like drag in a similar way, I think. The difference being that Taylor Swift is a cis, rich, and probably straight woman. So, in a way, her performance in The Man feels even more disconnected from queer culture.
So perhaps it feels inappropriate to call The Man drag in the same way I wouldn't necessarily use that word to describe Cate Blanchett's depiction of Bob Dylan. Because Blanchett is doing an impression or impersonation of Bob Dylan rather than creating a drag character, and one could argue that Swift is doing an impression of Leonardo DiCaprio as Jordan Belfort. But at this point I have to stop and ask, what is the point of saying this performance is male impersonation and not drag? Why did we just spend so many minutes drawing lines in the sand, hammering out queer semantics to try to unravel how the act of transforming gender through costume can feel so profoundly unqueer? I'd like to share with you one more quote from the Pretty Ricky interview.
I think if we went to Stefani right now and said, Joe Calderoni is a drag king, I believe that Lady Gaga would say yes. I think if you went to Taylor Swift and said, what you did, would you say that that was being a drag king? She would say, what's that?
And I really think this is what it boils down to. To be honest, Taylor Swift has a rocky relationship with the LGBT community, and while she does have a lot of LGBT fans, she also has a lot of LGBT detractors who believe the allyship she promotes is performative and disingenuous. Her political art feels like it exists more to stoke the flame than to raise awareness or promote understanding. I honestly think that my first instinct to dismiss The Man as not drag may have just been driven by a desire to gatekeep and say this rich cis artist will never understand drag performance the way a queer artist will. But I don't think it's right to say that only queer performance artists are allowed to have gender-bending costume in their performances. I'm told cis people have genders too, and they're allowed to make art about it. But truthfully, honestly, Taylor Swift doesn't get it. A lot of her movement coaching was done on set, sometimes moments before the camera started rolling, and her behind-the-scenes footage for the music video plays up how silly she looks behaving in her normal high-femme way while in the mask costume, and asking her male extras for tips on how to scratch her balls. The costume isn't a statement, it's a joke.
I have muscle suits on underneath things. I don't even want to talk to you. What else? I don't even want to tell you about it.
But there could have been a stronger statement there. It was so close. I don't think Taylor wanted this to be a joke. But the vision, like I said before, is inconsistent. And this one moment at the very end of the video comes very close to ruining the whole thing for me.
Hey, just checking. Was that last take more what you had in mind?
Pretty good. Could you try to be sexier? Maybe more likable this time?
Okay. Okay, no problem.
By the way, excellent work over there, Lauren. That was astonishing.
I get the joke, and I do think this is a fine way to make an observation like this. This is the way male directors treat their female stars no matter how experienced or talented, and having a split-screen effect with both Taylors is basically a must-have. But the premise of the video is that these conversations would not happen to her if she was a man, so why is it happening? I think she's weakening her point by doing this, and I think the inconsistency in the extras' reactions exacerbates the problem. If you want both Taylors in the video, there are two other ways I can think of to do it. Either have her get into costume at the beginning of the video rather than putting the reveal in the credits at the end, or do some kind of power play between the two Taylors during the final chorus. I think the strength of the song is an earnest longing for respect, and I would have liked to see the video lean more into that than into snarky ironicism. Personally, I would have cut the parenting scene or the scene with the young bride, moved the tennis match up, and have some kind of split-screen mirrored sequence, and if it was me directing, it would have been a dance sequence between man Taylor and woman Taylor. As if she's doing everything right, or doing all the same things her male alter ego would be, but they are living in two different worlds with two different sets of consequences. This is a vibe the lyric video actually taps into quite well. Go watch it, it's a way better video. Unfortunately, it is still just an okay song. Honestly, just this one little change would have made it all come together for me. But that certainly wouldn't have been so controversial or made right-wing cis men as mad. The Man is an interesting experiment in combining the Men Ain't Shit song with the drag video and using each genre to say the quiet part of the other genre loud. Personally, I think this one falls flat, more due to inconsistency than inauthenticity, but I would be glad to see more artists attempt something like this. But we have the video we have, so let's bring it all together. Do I agree with the message of the song, having seen from both sides, that handsome white men get an immediate approval and benefit of the doubt that women don't? In general, yes. And in the world of celebrity and entertainment, absolutely. But it's a little more complicated if you do it the slow way. I wish I passed as well as Taylor does in this video, that's all I'm saying. However, I do think that tendency towards immediate approval has been waning in recent years as we see more and more male celebrities held accountable for being, what was it? Bad? And this song might have felt a little more pertinent in 2017 than 2019. My point being, the politics feel a little stale, like Taylor's working through the backlog of 2010's discourse she opted out of. The only thing keeping the man feeling fresh is the gimmick. So let's try to figure out what the drag is adding to the message exactly. Taylor breaks the man character twice, and those switches seem like a good place to look for meaning. Once in the video, the little dialogue she has with herself as The Rock, and once in the lyrics during the bridge. We already talked about the bit in the video where the Taylor we know takes the position of power and authority, leading into these everything by me credits. The bit in the lyrics comes earlier, and this is what she says. If I was out flashing my dollars, I'd be a bitch, not a baller. They'd paint me out to be bad, so it's okay that I'm mad. And then the chorus just repeats a few times. So those two character breaks, plus the ending of the lyric video where the tiny woman who's been running from giant men gets saved by an even gianter version of herself, it all paints a pretty clear, unspoken message for the audience to take home at the end of the song. It is righteous to be bitter about this, and you, as a woman, can be just as, if not more powerful than the men around you. And I, Taylor Swift specifically, can handle myself just fine without a male co-director. So we've kind of come full circle then. It's immediately apparent that Taylor Swift, an artist with 15 years of history and a net worth of $360 million, would not need to be a man to reap the rewards of success and fame. And at the end of it all, Taylor has made a very expensive video showcasing just how much she already knew that. So I can still, after all of this thinking, only describe my feelings towards the man as confused. It's disorienting to see something that looks so familiar to me and feel completely unable to relate to it. To see something validate a real feeling of longing for male respect that so thoroughly rejects maleness. To see something that looks like drag or transformisme, but squeaky clean and sanitized and made to be about Taylor Swift's personal life. To me, this is You Need to Calm Down too. Meaning, I thought it was a shallow attempt at participating in sex and gender discourse with boring production and plain lyrics. I know some people really liked You Need to Calm Down, at least at the time, so maybe some people will like The Man too. I kind of doubt it, considering The Man debuted and peaked outside of the top 20, which for Taylor Swift is like, not charting at all. But that's about all I have in me on the topic. Jeez, it took me so long to make this video, I cut my hair halfway through. Let me know what you think in the comments of my hair, or the topic, I guess. I'd like to thank Luxander and Korviday for their help. Make sure to check out both of their channels. I'll thank my patrons and then I'll get out of here. Extra special thanks to AA Ron Fushi, Alexandria Chloe, Allison Watson, Avon, Crammed Voice Lessons, Daniel Keir, Dr. Crackshoe, Gaius Gallus, Isabella Lamar, Issy Ivans, Jack C., Jack Jacobs, Jackie B., Jawala, Jay, Jane the Human, Jesper the Danish Man, Kevin Sanders, LPQ Silver, Landry, Len Schweizer, Leo Chen, Mason, Mishka, Morndogs, Proton Donor, Quinn Hart, Sorry, Strong Jess, Stuntman, Sydney Satchwell, and Theodore Cruz for pledging $5 or more each month. Thank you very, very much to all of you. Thank you so much to everyone whose name is on the screen, not just the people who I've read. If you like what I do here, consider joining at patreon.com/boyform or subscribe and follow me on Twitter @inboyform. I think that's it. I'll see you next time.